So the story is like this. There's a person named Nimrod, and Nimrod rules the world. He's the king. He's got all the money, and he considers himself, his ego got to his head, and he considers himself God. And he decides that everybody needs to bow to him. And he had wise men, people who he listened to, who told him that Terach's son, Abraham, who was just born, this baby, is going to one day wake up and start spreading monotheism in the world. Nimrod calls Terach in and says, Terach, we need your son. And Terach says, give me 3 days. 3 days later, he shows up with a different baby, and Nimrod unfortunately kills this baby. And the whole incident is forgotten. In the meantime, Abraham grows up, and the Midrash says in Midrash Rabba that until the age 48, Abraham served idols. He tried every type of idol in the world, every religion or whatever religions were at that time. He tried everything. And at age 48, he decides there's one God in the world, and he begins a mission of going around and spreading the word of God. He takes tents, he becomes wealthy, and he starts telling people to follow God. And he starts teaching people about one God in the world. And what happens is that Terach, who is Abraham's father, who's an idol worshiper. In fact, he is the largest manufacturer of idols in the whole area. He has a warehouse filled with idols, huge place filled with idols. And when one day, he tells Abraham, come here, I want you to watch all my idols. And Abraham goes, and when he was younger, he brought them food, and he noticed that they don't eat the food. So he takes a hammer and he smashes the entire inventory, and he puts the hammer in one of the idols, the biggest one's hand. And his father comes back and says, what did you do? You're crazy. He says, I did it? He says, you don't understand. I gave this guy this idol food, and the other idol was jealous, and they started fighting, and before you know it, everybody killed everybody. And Terach, the father, says, what are you, crazy? He says, they can't do anything. He said, Avram says, well, so why do you worship them? Terach gets upset. He runs to Nimrod and he tells Nimrod, remember when I told you that the baby I gave you was my son? He says, that really wasn't what happened. He says, I was deceived. And really, Abraham is alive, and he's spreading monotheism, and he's denying who you are. Now, Nimrod gets very upset, and he decides to gather a huge army to go capture Avram. And what does Avram do? Avram decides he's going to Bavel. He's going to meet Nimrod face to face. And he gets to the city where Nimrod is. And this is where it gets interesting. So not only did Avram not hide, he went to the city where Nimrod was. And Nimrod was upset because he heard about Avram and he wanted to capture him. And Avram starts going through the city, and he starts announcing, and he starts teaching people. He's screaming in the streets, God is one. God created the universe, and you should only worship God and not worship Nimrod. Eventually, Nimrod captures Avraham and puts him in jail. He doesn't know what to do. So he speaks to his wise men, and they decide they're going to make a party. For 7 days, they drink and are merry. And on the 7th day, they call Abraham in, and they say, Abraham, come out of jail. Abraham comes up into the palace, and he walks into the room where Nimrod is, and he starts taunting him. He grabs his chair, and he starts shaking his chair and says, Nimrod, you're not God. Let's see if you can make the sun rise in the west instead of the east. Let's see if you could change nature. Do you have that power? And he starts screaming at Nimrod and telling him that God created the universe. And he speaks in such a voice, and God's voice spoke through him, that Nimrod and all the people around him, Rabbi Culi writes, were stuck for 2 hours. They couldn't move. Eventually, Nimrod looks up at him and says, I must admit, God does exist. I am not God. And he lets Abraham go. But after a few days, the party continues, and Avram starts gathering crowds of people. People start following Avram and start believing in one God, start praying to God. And Avram starts schools very quickly. teaching about God. An old man who's looking at a store to go buy an idol. Abraham approaches him and tells him, why are you buying an idol? He says, well, my old idol was stolen. So Abraham says, well, if your old idol was stolen, then he can't even protect himself. Eventually, Nimrod gets his energy back, and he goes and he calls his wise men and says, what should we do with Abraham? So Nimrod captures Avram, and he devises a plan to burn Avram at the stake. And not only will they burn him, what they decided to do was he calls Terach, and he says to Terach, I know you lied to me that you didn't actually give me your son, but I want to know who gave you this advice. And he says, well, it was my other son, Haran. Actually, that's Sarah's mother and Lot's mother. And he said, Haran is the one who gave me the idea. So Nimrod takes Haran and Avram and locks them up. They start announcing in the city and all the kingdom that everybody should come with wood. And for 40 days and 40 nights, they start this fire that gets so intense that nobody could get close. And Nimrod calls to the gatekeeper and says, I want you to go down to the jail and pull Avram out and bring him so we could burn him at the stake. He comes to the cell, and amazingly, Avram's in good health, although he's been given barely any food. He's been hostage by them. And Avram starts talking to him. And Avram says, listen, why are you burning me at the stake? So he says, well, we believe in Nimrod. And within a very short time, Avram convinced the jailer. He converted him to monotheism. And when Nimrod heard about this, he sent his best soldiers down there. And one by one, within a very short time, Avram had a following of people sitting with him in the jail cell over there, and he was teaching them Torah. When Nimrod heard about this, he was furious. And eventually, they captured Avram. He took the most wicked men among him. They capture Avram and Haran. They tie them up, and they couldn't get close to this fire. This fire was huge, and the entire city was so hot that nobody could get near the city. And they devised something that they could throw Avram into the furnace, into the flames. And eventually, this entire kingdom stands around and they witness Avram. First, they take Avram and they put him on the slingshot and they toss him into the flames. Nimrod's people tell him, you're not going to believe what's happening. Avram is just walking around inside of the furnace. He's not being burnt in Or Kasdim. Nothing's happening. And Haran, which was, the father of Sarah and Lot, is standing there, and Nimrod says to Haran, whose side are you in? Are you on my side? Are you on Abraham's side? Do you believe that I'm God, or do you believe that Abraham's God? And Haran, up until this point, was undecided. But once he saw that Abraham was walking around live in the fire, he decided, I'm with Abraham. And this shows that Haran wasn't 100%. Maybe his outsides were good, but something was inside of him didn't really, he lacked some faith that Abraham had. And they threw him into the fire as well. What happens is Nimrod can't believe that they're alive until he comes, sees it with his very eyes. And they want to pull Abraham out of the fire, but nobody could get close enough to pull him out. The Midrash tells us that 8 people died trying to get Avram out of the flames. They couldn't do it. So eventually what Nimrod needs to do to save face, because the entire city is gathered around watching this event, he calls out and he says, Avram, I want you to come out. And Avram says, I'm fine in here. And Nimrod says, I believe in your God. In the name of God of Abraham, come out and bear witness that I admit that I am not God and that your God is correct. And Avram comes out of the fire. Immediately, Nimrod bows down to Avram. The entire city bows down to Avram. And Nimrod stands up and he says to Avram, my son, I'm giving to you to be your slave. This slave, his name is Eliezer. Eliezer Eved Avram. And furthermore, Avram takes Eliezer and Nimrod gives him tons of gifts, fills him up with kesef v'zahav and gives him gold and silver. And Avram goes on his way. After a short period of time, Nimrod has a dream. And in his dream, he sees that Avram is going to come back and haunt him. And he begins to devise a plan. His faith in the God of Abraham wasn't real. And he falls back to his original ways. And he starts a process of chasing down Avram. Terach gets word of this, Avram's father, and he says, Avram, let's do something smart. Let's go to Eretz Canaan. And that's the final verses of chapter 11, where it says that Terach takes Avram, and he takes Eliezer, the servant, and Benefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, and he takes all the converts with him, and they go towards Eretz Canaan. They want to come to Eretz Yisrael, because Nimrod didn't have any jurisdiction over the land of Eretz Yisrael, over Canaan. And that is how chapter 12 begins, where God reveals himself to Abram and says, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'me'meladcha u'beis avicha. Leave your father's house. And the question really begs itself. If Abraham and Terach, his father, and Sarah and Haran was killed, but he goes with Lot, and he goes with Eliezer, and he goes with all the converts, and all the Bnei Noach, and they start traveling towards Canaan. Why is God telling him to travel? And why didn't God understand that he's already going there? And here I want to share with you some beautiful words of the Sfas Emes. If you've listened until now, I want to add another thing. First of all, please subscribe to my channel. 95% of my viewers aren't subscribed, and this past month we had 100,000 views, which means that this channel should be much bigger and we should be spreading Torah to more people. I get messages from people all around the world, from the furthest places, who listen to Torah and are learning Torah and are strengthening through these messages. But Avram and Terach are on their way to Eretz Yisrael. So why, says the Sfas Emes, does God need to tell him? And Sfas Emes says that every person on this world has something happening to them all the time. There's always a voice saying, Lech lecha me'artzecha. There's always a voice telling people to go out of what your comfort zone is. Leave your father's house. Leave your city. Try to establish something different. But why didn't he tell him where he's going, says the Sfas Emes? The Sfas Emes says that the whole concept of Eretz Yisrael, the whole concept of the land of Israel, is going with God, traveling because God told us to, and having full trust in God. Had God told Abraham that you're going to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to the land, that would completely separate him from the purpose of the mission. The purpose of the mission was to go with God. You see, Abraham had 10 trials. The final one was God seemingly asking him to bring his son up as an offering. It didn't happen. But after God promises him so many things in this week's Parsha, so many things in Genesis 12 and 13, so many stories, hopefully we will have several more videos discussing what it means from the river to the sea that God told Abraham, that he promised them that L'zaracha, for your children I will give this nation. And he says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. The story of Sarah, that she was barren and had no children, why that was a blessing. Like Isaiah says, Rani akaro yalada. Sing praise to the Lord that you didn't give birth yet, and wait until Abraham is given the commandment for circumcision. And the famine that's in the land of Israel, why there was a famine, why they went to Egypt. We'll discuss all these things. Because this chapters of Genesis is the heart and soul of the message of the Jewish people and the message of God about the destiny of the Jewish people. We will be a great nation, and those who bless us will be blessed, and those who curse us will be cursed. That we will have this amazing opportunity to be able to serve God with complete and absolute faith. Now, the question remains, why didn't God tell the story of the furnace? Why only the Midrash telling us this story? The answer, my friends, is this is exactly the point. The point of telling us that God just told Avram to go and not telling us the story, the backstory of why, is precisely the faith that God asks from us. And it's a good question why God didn't tell us the story of Or-Kasdim specifically in the Torah. It's only hinted at. You see, being able to jump in a furnace doesn't create Avram Avinu. I mean, just being able to do one simple act is not enough. That's what the Mishnah in Avos, Pirkei, the 5th chapter, the first, second, and third Mishnah are explaining. They're explaining there's a process of 10 like the fingers. 10 is the completion of a unit. When we have 10 generations from Adam to Noach, we have 10 generations from Noach to Avram, and Avram had 10 trials where God wanted to test him. God didn't test Noach. Noach wasn't ready to be tested. He wasn't going around spreading Torah and convincing people to join him. He only had his family in the Teva, like the Zohar says. But Avram, the Torah said, the story of jumping in a furnace or being thrown into a furnace because of your belief, while it's amazing, and millions of Jews were burnt in a furnace, but that itself doesn't create the father of Judaism. The father of Judaism needs to live by the Torah and needs to be able to show his faith through his trials in his life. And just like Abraham, who had his trials, which were designed specifically to create the father of the Jewish people, all our trials in our lives are specifically designed for us individually. God tailor-made every person's troubles, every person's difficulties in their life, in the macro and the micro, on the day-to-day little problems and the big problems, are exactly what God seems fit for that person to be able to grow closer to Hashem. Let's go back to the topic. When he wants to give Abraham a promise, he tells Abraham, your children will be slaved, will be going to Egypt, they'll be enslaved. And then afterwards they'll come out with the Torah. They will get the Torah at Mount Sinai. From Abraham, from his journey into Eretz Canaan, where he started to go on his own accord because he was running away from Nimrod, but he ended up going because God told him to go. And when God told him to go, God didn't tell him where he's going. And he went into the land and he traveled, but there was a famine and he had to go to Egypt. And he went to Egypt and they grabbed Sarah, his wife, and Paro tried to take Sarah from Abraham. And what does God do? God punishes Pharaoh. And Pharaoh finds out that it's his wife and asks, why did you say it was your sister? And then he gives him lots of good, lots of money and silver, and sends Avram back to the land of Eretz Yisrael. Does this sound familiar? Pharaoh sending the Jews out of his land to go to Eretz Yisrael, to go to Israel? You see, all these mini stories have a message, replica of the story of the Jewish people. Everything that happened to our fathers happened to the Jewish people. Avram meets a king. There's a war with 4 kings. And Abraham goes to war. And there's someone named Malki Tzedek Melech Shalom. And we know that this was the first mention of Yerushalayim. And this secret of Yerushalayim was hidden until King David did accounting, and the angel of death stood over Yerushalayim, and God revealed to David where the place of the temple will be. But the promise that he said to Avram, and Avram said, Baruch, blessed be. In this verse, it says, Asher etzeischa me'or kazdim. Avram hints at the story of the furnace. He says, you took me out of the furnace. And then he makes a covenant with him called Bris Ben Abisarim, where he cuts up the meat and he stands between it. And he promised, L'zarecha nasati es ha'aretz hazois minahar Mitzrayim ad nahar agodol nahar pras. I've given you from the river to the sea. I've given you this land. It will be yours and your children's ad olam forever. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. I read all the comments, and please look out for future videos on this week's portion called Lech Lecha. We're going to discuss it in depth. There's so much here. I wish I have the time. God should grant me the time that I'll be able to put out more videos on this week's Parsha, on this week's portion, because there's so much here. It's a world of Judaism hidden in these letters. Thank you for listening. From Israel, from Eretz Yisrael, Shalom. Thank you.